They're sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that could be good to our economy. So I want to keep helping our friends in Ukraine. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of.
A prominent U.S. politician has repeatedly said the quiet part loud, arguing that the United States and the West must continue supporting Ukraine, sending it more and more weapons in a proxy war against Russia because it has trillions of dollars of minerals that Western countries want to get access to, including some strategic minerals that are needed for advanced technologies. This has been argued by the U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham from the Republican Party. He is a notorious war hawk, and he has taken repeated trips to Ukraine. During his latest trip in September, the U.S. Senator published a video standing next to Ukraine's Western-backed leader, Volodymyr Zelensky. And in this video clip, he said very clearly, "We must continue supporting Ukraine, in no small part due to the fact that it has trillions of dollars of minerals."
I'm here with President Zelensky. I am such an admirer of what you and your country have done. You're trying to stop the Russians so we don't have to fight them. They don't want any American troops. They just need the weapons to free their country of a terrible invasion. They're sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that could be good to our economy. So I want to keep helping our friends in Ukraine. We can win this. They need our help.
Yes, we need, and we have already, the biggest help is the support of American people and support of our friends, thanks to Lindsey and his colleagues, to congressmen and senators from the United States. Thanks for this support, bipartisan support. Thank you so much.
Peace is coming.
Yes, soon.
Note how Lindsey Graham also argued that the West had to support Ukraine in order to fight Russia, so the West doesn't have to fight Russia on its own territory. This is an example of what people have said is the strategy of fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. Now, this is not the first time that Lindsey Graham has publicly salivated over the trillions of dollars of minerals in Ukraine. The U.S. Senator made very similar comments in June in an interview on CBS. He referred to Ukraine as a gold mine. He argued that the West cannot afford to allow those minerals to fall into the hands of the evil Russians and China. And he said that Ukraine could be the best business partner that the West has ever dreamed of.
What did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous.
When you see people in the West argue that NATO has to keep sending billions and billions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine in order to defend democracy and human rights, you should never forget those clips that we just saw there. They are very revealing about the ulterior motives of Western countries in Ukraine. Now, even some mainstream US media outlets have reported on this. The Washington Post, in fact, referred to the war in Ukraine as a battle for the nation's mineral and energy wealth. In this report back in 2022, the Washington Post noted, quote, "Ukraine harbors some of the world's largest reserves of titanium and iron ore, fields of untapped lithium, and massive deposits of coal. Collectively, they are worth tens of trillions of dollars," end quote. The Washington Post noted that in addition to having oil and coal and natural gas, Ukraine also has rare earth minerals. And this article noted that these include, quote, significant amounts of other valuable energy and mineral deposits used for everything from aircraft parts to smartphones, end quote. And it also added that these rare earth minerals that are located in Ukraine are, quote, essential for certain high-tech components that could hamper Western Europe's search for alternatives to imports from Russia and China, end quote. This point is absolutely crucial. The US and Europe have been trying to seek alternative producers of some of these critical minerals because the reality is that China is a huge part of the global supply chain. And the US energy chief said that the US government is very concerned. China is responsible for approximately 60% of the entire world's production of rare earth minerals. And the US Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, said, quote, it's one of the pieces of the supply chain that we're very concerned about in the United States. We do not want to be over-reliant on countries whose values we may not share, end quote. In fact, in 2022, the Joe Biden White House announced a new initiative to try to diversify the U.S. critical minerals supply chain for rare earth elements, especially, and lithium and cobalt. These are minerals that are needed for clean energy technologies like batteries, electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, and more. And the Biden administration has not only put tariffs on Chinese products and Chinese minerals, and it put export restrictions and sanctions on China, but furthermore, the Biden administration is investing hundreds of billions of dollars in its own domestic capacities for production to try to weaken China. And can you guess which country has been extremely important in Washington's attempt to weaken China and Russia and their influence in the global supply chain for critical minerals? You guessed it, Ukraine. In 2021, the official code of laws of the United States was updated and included a new section titled Cooperation between the United States and Ukraine regarding the titanium industry. And this is written into the letter of U.S. law. And it states, quote, it is the policy of the United States to engage with the government of Ukraine on cooperation in the titanium industry as a potential alternative to Chinese and Russian sources on which the United States and Europe currently depend. Of course, it's also corporations from the US and other Western countries that are profiting from this. Here at Geopolitical Economy Report, we've done extensive reporting on how Western governments have been imposing neoliberal economic policies on Ukraine, including mass privatization, selling off state-owned assets, and selling off natural resources to foreign companies. And at the same time, Ukraine has been viciously repressing its own workers, cutting workers' rights, basically making it illegal to form a union. Ukraine's Western-backed leader, Zelensky, has been really cozying up closely with Wall Street, offering hundreds of billions of dollars of state sell-offs, investments for Western capitalists who are getting very wealthy, profiting off of buying up Ukraine. And Zelensky symbolically rang the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange, announcing that his country is open for business. He is quite literally selling his country to Western capitalists.
We are defending freedom and property. Together, we'll be able to start the difficult work of rebuilding Ukraine, our cities, our economy, our infrastructure. It is already clear that this will be the largest economic project of our time in Europe. It is obvious that American business can become the locomotive that will once again push forward global economic growth. We have already managed to attract attention and have cooperation with such giants of the international financial and investment world as BlackRock, JP Morgan, and Goldman Sachs, such American brands as Starlink or Westinghouse, have already become part of our Ukrainian way. Your brilliant defense systems, such as HIMARS or Bradleys, are already uniting our history of freedom with your enterprises. We are waiting for Patriots. We are looking closely at Abrams. Thousands of such examples are possible, and everyone can become a big business by working with Ukraine in all sectors, from weapons and defense to construction, from communication to agriculture, from transport to IT, from banks to medicine. And I believe that freedom must always win. And I invite you to work with us right now.
So it is very concerning to see the cynicism of these Western governments that claim to support democracy and human rights while they are using Ukraine as a battering ram to try to wage a proxy war against Russia, fighting to the last Ukrainian. The average age of a Ukrainian soldier fighting on behalf of NATO on the front lines is now between 43 and 45. It is a horror show. I mean, it is so sad seeing this complete destruction of a nation. And yet the Western governments that keep expanding this war and pushing Ukrainians into the meat grinder on behalf of Western imperial hegemony, they are profiting. I mean, it is completely cynical. In 2015, academic experts in the West published a very interesting scholarly journal article that looked at the role of natural resources in armed conflicts around the world. They published an article that summarized their findings titled, "Fueling Conflict, the Role of Oil in Foreign Interventions." They noted that they found, quote, statistical evidence that Central Intelligence Agency covert operations during the Cold War resulted in increased imports of United States goods from target countries without the same holding true for exports. And, quote, U.S. military assistance increased non-military bilateral trade flows with the recipient country, end quote. They also added, quote, we found that oil production and known oil reserves are central factors motivating third-party military interventions. More specifically, we demonstrated that the higher the quantities of oil produced and are owned by a country at civil war, the higher the likelihood of third-party intervention. Moreover, we found that the tighter the oil market is, the higher the likelihood of third-party intervention, end quote. So if there are only a few countries that are major oil producers like the US, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and the oil price is very high, and a country like the US wants to reduce the oil price, what it can try to do is force other countries to produce more oil. And one of the ways it can do that is through direct military intervention. And we've seen this repeatedly. And this academic article, these scholars noted, I'm reading again, quote, while other factors also play a role, intervention is approximately 100 times more likely when the country at war has a high value of reserves and the intervening country has high oil imports than when the country at war has no oil reserves and the potential intervener has high oil exports, end quote. They found statistically that it is 100 times more likely that there is foreign intervention in a civil armed conflict if the country has oil and other major natural resources. Sounds familiar, right? Now, all of that said, I do want to be clear here. I'm not saying that the war in Ukraine is only about the massive mineral and energy reserves that Ukraine has. It's not only about natural resources. No war is ever only about one thing. Every war always has multiple causes, multiple reasons. But it would be very naive to ignore the role of strategic natural resources. Of course, there are many other important factors. There's the geopolitics, the location of Ukraine, which shares a massive border with Russia, and Ukraine was also used in order to invade the Soviet Union and Russia by the Third Reich during World War II. And if US NATO forces want to carry out a conventional direct war on Russia, they would very likely use Ukraine as their base of operations in order to invade Russia, and they would cut off the southern part of Russia from the northern part of Russia. This would cut off Russia's access to the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. It would cut off Russia's access to the Caucasus and then further south into West Asia, the so-called Middle East. And of course, US NATO forces would like to cut off Russia's access to its only warm water base, which is in the port of Sevastopol in Crimea. This is why the West is so obsessed with Crimea and trying to take it back for Ukraine, because they want to prevent Russia from having access to the Black Sea. They want to turn Black Sea into a NATO sea, like the Mediterranean basically is. So for Russia, from a national security perspective, if Ukraine joins NATO, it would be an existential threat. It would be a massive base of operations used by the US and Western powers to try to destabilize, overthrow, invade Russia. I mean, this is why for Russia, this is such a sensitive issue. And this isn't even to mention the extreme danger of nuclear weapons and what it would mean if Ukraine hosted US NATO nuclear weapons just right on Russia's borders that could easily target Moscow and other major Russian cities. So obviously, the war in Ukraine is about much, much more than just minerals, just natural resources. The geopolitics of the conflict are clearly very important. The national security implications, the Western war hawks who have salivated for decades over the possibility of invading Russia, colonizing Russia like they tried to do in the 1990s after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. These are all factors. Again, I'm not saying there's only one reason for the war in Ukraine, but what I am saying is that it's not about democracy and human rights. And anyone who believes that has the intellectual analysis of a child. This is extremely naive. This is not how the world works. That is the propaganda that Western governments and their obedient mouthpieces in the corporate media regurgitate, but don't take them at their word. Some of these Western officials, like the US Senator Lindsey Graham, sometimes say the quiet part loud and admit that they have ulterior motives driving this conflict.